Isle of Shadows. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow across the abandoned aisles. David pushed his cart slowly, wheels squeaking against linoleum. He shouldn't have lingered. The clock above the deli counter blinked 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes until closing time. He rounded the corner into the dairy aisle, a shiver running down his spine. The air here felt different, colder somehow. A faint metallic scent hung in the air, barely perceptible but unmistakable. Blood. He quickened his pace, pushing past the yogurt and cheese, his pulse throbbing in his ears. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking behind the towering shelves of milk and cream. The last shopper. He reached the checkout, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager with a nose ring and tired eyes, scanned his meager purchases. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a six-pack of beer. "That'll be $12.53, she mumbled, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. He fumbled for his wallet, his hands trembling. "You know," she said, her eyes flicking up to meet his, "we have to lock up on time." No exceptions. A chill ran down his spine. Her tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of malice, but laced with an unspoken warning. "Right," he stammered, forcing a smile. He paid quickly, his hands shaking slightly, and grabbed his bag. He could feel her eyes on him as he turned and hurried toward the exit, the automatic doors sliding open with a heavy sigh. Muffled echoes. He was the last one out, the doors closing behind him with a finality that sent another shiver down his spine. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. The parking lot was deserted, illuminated by the harsh glare of the sodium lamps. His car, a beat-up Honda Civic, sat alone in the vast emptiness. He hurried to his car, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He fumbled with his keys, his hands slick with sweat. He unlocked the door and slid inside, the familiar scent of dust and old fast food wrappers washing over him. He locked the doors, his heart still racing. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, glancing back at the store. The windows were dark now, the interior shrouded in shadow. He could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the gloom, just beyond the glass. He blinked, and it was gone. The cleaning crew. He drove home, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him in the store. The cashier's words, her eyes, the strange, cold feeling in the dairy aisle, it all added up to something, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just his nerves. He was tired, that was all. He pulled into his driveway and parked, his headlights illuminating the garage door. He sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. He could have sworn he heard a noise, a faint scraping sound coming from the back seat. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. There was nothing there. He must have imagined it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He got out of the car, his legs shaky, and fumbled for his keys. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, his hand reaching for the light switch. He flicked it on, but the lights didn't come on. Aisle 5. Canned goods. He cursed under his breath and turned to go back outside, but as he did so, he heard another sound. This one was unmistakable, the distinct click of a deadbolt sliding into place. He whirled around, his blood turning to ice. The front door was closed. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He was locked in. Panic surged through him, cold and sharp. He rattled the doorknob, his heart pounding in his chest. He kicked at the door, but it was no use. It was solid wood, reinforced with steel. He was trapped. He turned away from the door, his mind racing. Frozen in fear. He reached the kitchen, his heart pounding against his ribs. The back door was just beyond the fridge. He knew it. He could see a faint sliver of light filtering in through the edges of the blinds. He lunged for the door, his fingers closing around the handle. He pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. He rattled the handle, his frustration turning to despair. He was trapped. He sank to his knees, his back against the cold, hard surface of the refrigerator, his chest heaving. He was going to die here. He knew it. He could feel it in his bones. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He was so stupid. He should have listened to his gut. He should have left when he had the chance. But it was too late now. The figure in the shadows. He opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping over the darkened kitchen. There had to be something here, something he could use to defend himself. A knife maybe, or a heavy pan. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs wobbly, and began searching the drawers and cupboards. He found a few utensils, a spatula, a whisk, a wooden spoon, but nothing that could be considered a weapon. He was about to give up hope when he spotted it. A cast-iron skillet, heavy and solid, resting on the stovetop. He grabbed it, his fingers closing around the rough texture of the handle. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He hefted it in his hand, feeling the weight of it. It would have to do. No service. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. It was in the kitchen now, just beyond the pool of light cast by the open refrigerator door. He held his breath, his eyes straining to pierce the darkness. He could feel a presence there, cold and menacing, watching him. He raised the skillet, his arms trembling with the effort of holding it aloft. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What do you want?" There was no answer, only the sound of his own breathing and the slow, deliberate scraping sound which seemed to be coming from right in front of him now. He took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get out of here. He turned to run, to make a break for the back door. The back room. He stumbled back, his foot catching on something on the floor. He fell, landing hard on his back, the air knocked from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, his eyes fixed on the shadowy figure that stood over him. It was closer now, its cold, clammy hand reaching for him. He scrambled back, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. The figure grabbed him by the ankle, its grip like a vice. He screamed again, his voice raw with terror. He kicked out wildly, trying to free himself, but the figure was too strong. It dragged him across the floor, his fingernails scraping against the hardwood. He was pulled through the doorway into the darkness beyond. He caught a glimpse of a long, narrow hallway, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with boxes and crates. Escape? He was pulled to his feet, his back slammed against a cold, damp wall. He looked around wildly, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. He was in a small, windowless room, its walls lined with shelves filled with jars and bottles of various shapes and sizes. The air was thick with the cloying scent of formaldehyde and something else, something metallic and sharp. Blood. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, his voice choked with fear. He looked up at the figure that stood before him, its features still hidden in the shadows. It was holding something in its hand, something long and sharp that glinted in the dim light. A knife. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. The warning, but the blow never came. He opened his eyes slowly, cautiously. The figure was gone. He was alone. He let out a shaky breath, his body trembling with relief. He had been spared, but why? He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the shelves. That's when he saw it. A single word, scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. A warning. Leave. He didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled to his feet and ran, his heart pounding in his chest, never looking back. He didn't stop running until he reached his car. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the door open. He threw himself inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He was safe now. He was safe. He glanced back at the store, its windows dark and empty. He could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the gloom, just beyond the glass, watching him.